the podcast today is the man, all the way from Florida in the United States. Mark Withers joins me. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolute pleasure. As you said to me before, I believe it's one of your first, if not your first podcast, so thank you very much for having me.
Yes, it is actually. So I'm excited to start doing this kind of
Good,
stuff.
as you should. It's always good fun. So do you want to start us off then with Florida? Now, I've never been to the United States of America, but obviously Florida's a very well-known place. It's a big place. So what was Florida like for you growing up? Maybe just away from football?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Florida boy at heart. I did grow up all over the United States. So I was in the Pacific Northwest as well, Washington State, Montana, Dallas, Texas for a while, but always back and forth between Florida. And it's what you can expect, tropical place, beaches, things like that. I'm mostly from Orlando, Florida. So Disney World and stuff like that, Universal Studios. Yeah, it's a very humid environment. If you kind of get the picture there. And it's definitely one of the football hotspots in the United States. So that was good. Between Orlando and Miami, it's definitely a football hotspot. And so that was a really good place to grow up playing the game.
So you mentioned there that, Dallas, Texas is one of them, Montana, Florida too. Now, I might be disrespecting Americans here, but there must be some quite big differences between all those places.
Oh, for sure. Not just, I mean, culturally as well, but definitely in the football styles as well. And also the cultural influence you have in each one. Dallas, Texas, as you know, there's a lot of Mexicans and that kind of influence. And then Pacific Northwest, we go play competitively in Canada as well. So I had some interesting experiences growing up, just culturally. Down in Miami, you kind of have a Latin hotspot as well. There's a lot of Brazilians in Orlando and stuff. So that was interesting as well growing up. But yeah, definitely very different each region of the United States.
For sure. So do you want to start us off there with Orlando? So Orlando, I believe, was one of your first, if not your first, major experience. It was in around 2013. You left there, I believe it was, or you started. No, sorry, you started there in 2013. What was it like for you? Am I right saying that?
Yeah, just before that, I entered senior football 2011. I was still in high school actually, and I entered the Orlando City B team. Kind of, it was back then it was called something different, but essentially the Orlando City B team when I was 17, 18, and then fully professional 2013, where I went to Atlanta.
And what was the American setup like for a young guy just finished secondary school like yourself? You were in that professional environment. I'm presuming you were getting paid. You were living a footballer's dream even then.
A little bit, yeah. Football, it was always my dream to play professionally. As you know, a lot of American athletes, they go through the university system. So that was probably one of the first hallmarks of my career that kind of stands out is graduating high school. I was involved in the senior setup of Orlando City, where in the summers I'd play with the B team when I was 17 and 18. And I had university offers to some pretty big universities, 4-year programs to play Division II, Division I men's soccer. And that's the typical pathway, especially when I was growing up before academy football came around. The typical pathway to go professional is to play 2 to 4 years of university, then go into the MLS draft with the USL Championship. I actually decided to forego university completely, and I didn't have a professional contract in hand at the time. So that was and I got a lot of flack. I kind of had a falling out with my dad at the time, because I decided to essentially not do university football and pursue a professional career. And I actually went through the route of doing the open tryouts, the combines and things like that. And I ended up signing for the Atlanta Silverbacks in the NASL, which that used to be the second tier of American football. And that's when I was fully professional. And yeah, that's kind of how I made it. It was a bit of a grind, but that's how I kind of broke into the professional game.
So I'm really keen then to know about like your first professional experience when you've been put into an environment like that. Often in England, the way that we might say it is quite robotic, that players are told to do this and they're told to work in systems, and even more so as an attacking player. So what was it like for you going into straight into a professional system?
Yeah, it was a bit of a adaptation because I was 19, 20. I was, a winger, a quick winger, skill and things like that before I just enjoyed the game and stuff. And suddenly you're training 5, 6 days a week and having to trying to break in against, players that are, 25 to 30 and make a living off the game. I was not paid a lot at first. I did have an apartment, provided by the team, but I was just happy to be there. It was the dream, as you said, but I was definitely not making, the big bucks or anything. and the adaptation was difficult. My first season, I didn't even have a professional appearance for the first team. So it was challenging. That one was interesting because the NASL back then was the second division. We played against, teams like the New York Cosmos and things like that, which are pretty big brand teams. In my club, the Silverbacks, we actually won the league the first year on the lowest budget in the league. So that was my first. Luckily, my rookie year, we won the league and went to the Super Bowl, the finals back then against the Cosmos. So that was a pretty cool
Mm.
experience. And it was a good changing room and everything. So I was lucky to have some really experienced players that had MLS experience around me and things like that. And that was actually probably one of my best changing rooms I've ever had, one of the best locker room environments. And so I was really lucky in that
Mm.
sense, actually.
So the Atlanta Silverbacks, now you're going to have to explain to me how far that is from Florida. I've heard of Atlanta before, by the way, so I'm not completely out of it. But your first proper experience, as you mentioned there, you managed to get the silverware that was required on the lowest budget. But what was it like for you to move across the country?
Yeah, I had quite a few moves, and as you'll find out, I've
Mm.
moved across the globe. And so football just started taking me point to point to point. Even before that, I went to Ecuador for 3 months when I was 16. When I was trying to break into the pro game, I went back. This is before Atlanta. I went back to Ecuador for 3 months, and played in a U20 reserve team. And so I do have I played in Ajax America in Orlando, and had a couple stints where we went to Europe, for tournaments and things like that. And then, yeah, the travel with Atlanta. Atlanta's about 8.5 hour drive from Orlando. So I actually made the drive up there, and I was living on my own when I was 18, 19. That was another adjustment as well. Just going into living on your own with a bunch of guys, when you're 18, 19, you have to grow up pretty quickly. And you don't have your mom around and stuff. And so that was, how to feed myself, how to make it in a big city. Atlanta is quite a big, vibrant city. So I was kind of thrown into the deep end in that sense. And then the travel in the league is all over the US. So suddenly you're traveling every weekend, long bus rides and plane rides and things like that. But I loved all of it. And so, yeah.
Mm. So talk to me then about Ecuador. Now, I've never been to Ecuador, but it looks like a very vibrant country. It looks like just a great footballing country. So what did you actually learn when you were there? Because I would have thought there'd be a lot of technique that you improved in.
Yeah, so my first time was probably I was 16, and then I went back when I was 18, because I loved it so much, and it was so important to my football experience and me maturing as a player. The first time was definitely a shell shock. It is a third world country. It's an amazing country. I ended up making some great friends. It's a place where you could have either, sink or swim. For the first time, I played on dirt fields, not as an immersion program, not like as a tourist. I played official under 20 matches on dirt pitches, with players who later played for the national team, and played, went to West Ham and things like that. And yeah, very athletic players, just raw athleticism, raw technique, and things like that. And it was the first time playing with players. It gave me a real perspective on football outside the United States, because it's cute as a kid saying I want to play professional football, but for the first time I was playing with players where that was their only way out. Otherwise it was poverty, and it was very real. It was very shocking as a 16-year-old, as an 18-year-old, to really find out what football is in a different country where you either make it or you don't, or you're in poverty the rest of your life. And it put a new meaning on what the sport is. And so that was really impactful for me. And that stayed with me throughout my entire career. Um, Not just the play style and the things I learned, and also being an American player. A lot of people, maybe not the typical American player. I definitely have a South American influence. As you'll later find out, I played in Europe for quite some time as well. So it really defined me as a player.
And there is a lot of clubs to talk about in a lot of countries, including Andorra, which I'm pretty interested to talk about. But could you
Yeah,
talk to me then
yeah,
about Dallas Sidekicks? Now, I'm president of a charity in Texas, Dallas. So what is Texas, Dallas like as a place?
yeah. Yeah, that's a funny one because my family actually happened to move to Dallas, Texas, and I was playing in Atlanta, and so I just went home to visit in the off season. So the indoor season goes maybe September through March, and then there, as you know, American football goes January or February through November. That's how the seasons went. So I went home for an off season and just started training with the Dallas Sidekicks for an indoor. Decided to sign, so I ended up playing year round for 2 years. I'd play, in the American Second Division, the NASL, and for 11-a-side football, and then go home, play a couple months of indoor soccer. It was a great experience. The Dallas Sidekicks are a big franchise there. You play in kind of what is like a hockey stadium. It's an oval arena and people are close. There's music. It's kind of like an NBA vibe. There's timeouts and things like that. Very high energy sport. It's an interesting sport because there's different tactics, kind of like futsal has different tactics. So it is soccer, but it's almost a complete different game. And I really enjoyed it. My family could come watch me play. There's a lot of travel for that as well. But definitely more like music, autographs, things like that. But I loved it. I did have to make a decision at that point whether I was going to go indoor football route or stay with the 11 side game. And of course, for me, I was still young at the time, 20, 21 years old, and I had aspirations to play in Europe. So I had to fully focus on 11-a-side football. But it was a great experience, and it's a really fun game, and a lot of fans as well. I remember Dallas Sidekicks. We'd play close stadium, but we had 10,000 people at some of our games, which was really really fun.
So when you were at Dallas, Texas, this indoor soccer idea, right? I've never heard of indoor soccer before, but I think I can understand what it is. In Finland, for example, they play in indoor soccer, but it is 11v11. It's just so cold they have to go inside. But I'm thinking that this might be...
Yeah.
Was this 11v11 or was this like 6-a-side, 5-a-side?
No, it's 5 on the field with goalkeepers, so
Right.
it's 6
Okay.
aside. And it's not even futsal, so it is an oval field with walls on it, and
Yes, yeah,
you
yeah,
play
yeah.
off the walls. Yeah, so it's a very fast-paced game, and you make substitutions on the fly as well, almost like hockey, jumping over the boards and stuff to make substitutions on the fly. And there's power plays and all this kind of stuff if a player gets carded and stuff. So then it'll be a 5v4 on the. It's a really fun game. And it used to be really popular in the States, maybe in the 90s. I mean, just massive stadiums, some massive franchises. The people were really into it. It was almost more popular than the outdoor game, and the players made more money playing indoor than outdoor back then. And there was an indoor football draft and everything for the players coming out of college. So it used to be really huge. And yeah, it's still around. It's still around today, the Major Arena Soccer League. And some of my friends still play and stuff, and it's a cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds quite cool. I mean, I've done 6-a-side before, and well, firstly,
Yeah.
it takes a lot on the body because it's a smaller pitch, but it's so intense, so
That's the
intense.
other thing.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
no professional footballer, so you can imagine how much I struggle. And I'm one-footed, and I have no skill, so I absolutely got fried every
Yeah.
game. Um, the
Yeah.
next big move for you is pretty interesting. So you left Dallas, Texas, you left your home country, and travelled all the way to Europe to the Portuguese football system. That is quite some move. I mean, moves like this, they don't come about very often, but for you, they have. But how do they come about in your mind?
Yeah, it's a bit more common now, but back then the bridges between the United States and Europe were sparse. There were not a lot of, and I didn't know anybody, and also I only have an American passport. That's the other big issue. So the players who you saw made the jump back then to Europe were only national team players, MLS players, or players who had a European passport that went back to visit family, and usually American players went to countries like Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, where the visa restrictions are much easier for American players. Um, by chance, a coach out of Dallas, Texas, uh, just had a connection to an agent in Portugal. I went for what was supposed to be 1 month, but I ended up going for 3 months. And he brought me to some clubs to train, and I trained with the club, Varzim Sport Club, and ended up training with them for 3 months and got along with the coach who got promoted to the first team coach. And he brought me back to sign that August, that July. I was there January through March and did well training for 3 months, kind of had to pay my dues just on a tourist visa. And then over the summer, we sorted everything with my visa and everything to have a work permit, do the Portuguese, residency process with a professional contract and all that kind of stuff, and signed with Varzim Sport Club um, within that year. And so the most challenging issue was the visa process and the work permit process. And as a foreigner, they have to pay you, I think 150% of the minimum working wage. So you have to be worth it to the club. And also there's obviously foreigner spots and all these other things. And that was all new to me. I just thought, oh, football, go play in Europe. If you're good enough, you're going to make it. But there's visa restrictions, there's foreigner spots in Europe. And as I soon found out, that was the biggest battle of making a career in Europe, especially only with the European passport. But that's how I made the jump. And I signed my professional contract with a second division team in Portugal. Ended up playing my first season mostly with the third division side, their B team, and getting loaned to third division side. But when people say second division football in Portugal, I don't think they really realize that those are full-time professional athletes and the level's actually quite high. So I was, for the first time, making a living off of football, living in Portugal, which was very cool. And there were definitely some challenges in my first year. But
And I
yeah,
do want to speak about those challenges, but to play second tier in Portugal, I've never heard of this team before. But to clarify, you were like one promotion off playing against Porto or Benfica.
exactly.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is pretty cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, talk to me then about these challenges. I can understand that maybe a different language, a culture, the footballing philosophy as well, because as an attacking player, maybe often they might want to put you at a wing back or something like that, which perhaps happened with you. So, speak to me about all those challenges that you faced.
That is what happened with me. So I entered Europe, Portugal mainly as a winger, as an attacking player. In America, obviously, I was a young up and coming player. I was already kind of in, maybe the under 23 national team pool, because I was playing at a high level. I was one of the only young players. Made the jump to Europe and did well at first. The language, I had a base in Spanish because I'd been in Ecuador, I studied in high school, but European Portuguese, I could not understand a lick, and I quickly learned the language because I quickly learned I had to understand directly myself what the coach was saying. Because believe it or not, there was only one or two players who could even remotely speak English where I was. That was the other issue is a lot of times you go abroad, if you go to Sweden or something, a lot of people speak English. If you go to Germany, a lot of people speak English. I went to Portugal and no one spoke English, and it was very alienating, and trainings felt like they were 3 hours long. And at the end of the day, my whole life was in Portuguese. My nervous system was just exhausted. And so the cultural adaptation was huge. I lived around Porto always. So that's northern Portugal. It gets quite cold in the winters as well. And my idea of Portugal was, oh, southern Portugal, beaches, hot. And so that was quite difficult as well. The European climate was challenging as well. Play style. Portugal is very tactical. This is when Jose Mourinho was on the up and coming, and Andre Villas-Boas and all these Portuguese coaches. The Portuguese philosophy was really, infiltrating Europe, and it's very tactical. We talk about tactics in football. We throw that word around quite a bit, but tactics in a country like Portugal or Spain, they're very second nature because the players just know it from their youth development. And I was trying to catch on to it at age 21, 22. And it's just second nature to them. And you realize the game is so much faster because I'm not talking about 5 yard differences or 5 meter differences, but just continuous movement on the field, positioning in relation to the ball, in relation to the opponent, the defensive line, moving up, and they're all the players are connected and everything. The timing of the movements, it's a complete different level. And so I did get moved to playing quite a bit of wingback off and on throughout my entire career in Europe, just because it was a little bit more linear, I guess. You're always facing forward. It's easier to overlap and stuff. Whereas a winger, you're inverting, you're coming in, you're coming out. And so those were some of the challenges I faced tactically. It took probably a year and a half to really adapt, but it really paid off for the rest of my time in Europe and coming back to play abroad. When I went back for small stints in the US, and then when I finally came to Australia, the tactical game really, almost football intelligence, really was a huge benefit.
This is going to sound maybe like a bit of a silly question. It's quite a niche question.
Yeah,
But back then, so 2016, 2015, even when you started in 2013, there was no such thing really as social media. And I know a lot of footballers these days would be quite
right.
heavy on, promoting themselves in the second division of Portugal, for example. But what was actually the thing back then? Like, what was, instead of social media, was it emails? Like, what did you put your life on?
That is a funny question. That was another hard adaptation that I didn't really think about until recently. When I was doing all this moving around and stuff, we didn't have FaceTime. We didn't have data roaming. We didn't have Instagram. So that was really difficult as well because I couldn't talk with family and stuff. I remember I didn't have Wi-Fi and stuff, and it would just be sad and quiet. Whereas now, when you move abroad as a kid, you can FaceTime your parents on data roaming in the streets and stuff. And you look at my apartment, all this kind of stuff where I'd only have like a 1 hour window if I could grab some Wi-Fi from, a neighbor or something. And then also when I was first starting out, I mean, we're still talking emailing CVs and emailing clubs. And when I was trying to make it in the US, sending raw emails, to clubs and coaches and technical directors. And it was still in Portugal, still agents and long lunches and meeting with clubs to secure next contracts and things like that where yeah, you're right. Nowadays it's people will search up your Instagram profile and things like that. And you're continuously putting out just, 30-second clips and stuff, almost like TikTok style. Football's become kind of that, YouTube, TikTok style things. And back then it was even difficult to get highlight footage back then because we didn't have VO. I didn't have,
Yeah.
the VO cameras growing up where now youth kids, are doing their U6 under 16 matches and they had better highlights than I did. I remember I used to struggle to get highlights. I still don't have my Portugal playing footage because it was all on Sport TV, kind of like Bet Sport. I didn't have rights to my own highlights, so that was interesting as well. Those are huge differences, in the modern
And the
game.
second club you spent your time with in Portugal was SC Salgueiros. Now, my Portuguese pronunciation always gets put to the test, and that was absolutely awful. You can tell me how to properly say it in a moment. But what was the biggest shock compared to the United States in terms of the footballing culture in Portugal?
That's another one. So we're talking about playing in the second division and third division in Portugal. So in the United States, I did play in front of, some big crowds, but you moved to Portugal and SC Salgueiros is a very big historic club. They used to be in the first division. They used to play against FC Porto and Benfica. They were one of the top four clubs in the country. It's where Deco's from. That was Deco's club. And they used to play Champions League. They actually went into financial ruin and they got demoted all the way back to the eighth division. They promoted all the way back up to the third division, and that's when I joined them. So they actually have a massive fan base in the city. It used to be as big as Porto's fan base and everything else. So when I was playing for Salgueiros, we probably have maybe 800 to 1,500 traveling fans, and then in our home matches, we had up to 7,000 fans some games. But it was cool playing for them because when you went about the city of Porto, which is a massive city, people know you as a footballer, and they say, "Who do you play for?" And even though they were in the third division, everyone knows who SC Salgueiros is. It's a historic club. It is very cool. Another challenging thing is the fan base. The fans in Portugal, as you know, in the UK, they are very hard on the players. You can hear them yelling at you, and even as a foreigner, there's a lot of pressure as well, because they'll call you things. Yeah, you're not a domestic player, and the fans are very into it. You're in the papers, the day after the game. You go, to the bars and, cafes in the city and people are talking about the results from the match and they'll say stuff to you. So there was a whole new level of, I guess you could call it cultural pressure or just care about the game that is incomparable. I would say even today in the United States, where, in England as well, in the UK, that football is, people really care about it. So that was a huge adjustment.
Could you speak to me then about the club and tell me how you actually pronounce that team?
Yes,
Oh,
SC
Salgueiros.
Salgueiros.
Oh, that's easier.
Yeah,
So,
Salgueiros. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
You were
know, I know.
close. You were
I
close.
need to really improve on these pronunciations. I'm awful at them. But could you speak to me then about the difference? Because you would have spent some time in Portugal with the previous club, so maybe the culture shock wouldn't have been so big.
Right. Actually, I adapted quite well. So I learned Portuguese and was pretty fluent within a year and a half, to the point that a lot of people in the country thought I already had Portuguese naturalization, or they thought I was Brazilian, because I did have a little bit of a, Brazilian, the way I spoke and stuff. But I spent quite a lot. I ended up spending 5 or 6 years in Portugal, keeping an apartment there. Even when I went abroad to play again, I maintained an apartment in Portugal, and I established a life there, like, completely. And during I I started thinking in Portuguese. So if that goes to tell you how much I adapted, I actually spoke more Portuguese than English. The only time I'd speak English was with, my brother who came and lived with me, or, with my family on FaceTime and stuff. Otherwise, I was completely Portuguese. And so that's pretty much how far I adapted.
Andorra came up next, and I'm very interested to speak about this. So Andorra is a very small country. Um, they're not ranked very
Yes.
highly on the international stage or in terms of professional footballers. You might be the
No.
only person I've ever spoken to who has ever stepped foot in Andorra, let alone played for a team there. So Andorra, they also speak Spanish, right?
The national language is
Okay.
Catalan, but yes, they
Mm.
speak Spanish, Spanish, Catalan, and French, because it sits right between Spain and France, and so they kind of speak all three
And you
languages. Yes.
competed in the Premier Division, as again, I've probably mispronounced that completely. But what was your time like there? You played over 2,000 minutes, so you had a long, long time playing football.
Yeah, I think I have over 60 appearances or something in the Premier League there. That was another huge difference moving to Europe, is there's a lot more games than the US calendar. As you know, in the UK, you have midweek cup games and things like that. That was another adjustment. But Andorra was interesting, because one of my first Portuguese coach who signed me to the first club, Barzim, he's actually a pretty famous Portuguese player. His name is Kimberto, and he played for the Portuguese national team, was Sporting Lisbon, icon, and he became a great friend and coach and everything. He took up a job in the Portuguese First Division, which is a European Premier League, and I had actually just signed with my next club in Portugal, and right the week before we were supposed to go into the season in Portugal, he called me and said, "Do you want to come play in the Andorran Premier League?" I did not know where Andorra was. I had never heard of the country. So I'm looking up on my phone, and I had to do it before the transfer deadline. And I decide yes. And we found a way to rescind my contract in Portugal, sign a new contract, and it was actually sad, because my mom was visiting me for a week for the first time in years, and I said I have to move countries tomorrow. I packed my car and drove to Andorra after looking up, where is this country, on my phone and stuff. And people say, why did you do that? As an American player playing in your, because as you said, it's not a highly ranked country and all this kind of stuff, but it's a Premier League country in Europe. So that means the top teams go to Champions League and Europa League qualification, which as an American player, that is very enticing. And so I signed for the Portuguese First Division team named Lusitanos, which is, interestingly enough, a Portuguese immigrant club. And without knowing anything about the country of the league, I drove there and started preseason.
But now, obviously, it may have been even better to join a team in Andorra, because you can have access to the Conference League, perhaps, and other competitions. But how do you rate your time in Andorra? What's the fan support like out there?
Fan support is very low. It was a very interesting experience. It's one of my favorite experiences. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. And yeah, people don't rate the football there very highly, but what you have to understand is all the domestic players are from Spain, which Spanish football is very, very good. And there's quite a few French and players from Barcelona who play there to finish their career. And there's quite a few players that own clubs there. As you might know now, there's one club there named FC Andorra, and Gerard Piqué is actually the owner. And back then, in my time, they were in the fifth division of Spanish football. And during my time there, they promoted up to the third division. And now, as you know, they're in the Segunda Liga of Spain. And Gerard Piqué was the owner. So he actually frequented Andorra and was there. Javier Saviola, the Argentinian forward, lives in Andorra. And I played with players who played for Pep Guardiola in Andorra. So they only have four foreigner spots per team. Um, they do pay well, some of the clubs and stuff. And then the biggest thing is it's a Premier League, which is very cool to be playing in a European First Division. Stylistically, they play Spanish football, which was very different than Portugal. I thought it'd be similar. It did take a preseason to adapt at first because Portuguese football, they accelerate the flank play. So it is possession style football, but they accelerate the flank play. Whereas Spanish football, as you know, it is the tiki-taka style, which people say, oh, Spanish football is slow. I went there, it's extremely fast. So it looks like, oh, they're, possession, slow build-up play, things like that. Um, it was very challenging because it looks like they're not defending hard, but they're just waiting for the moment to cut your passing lane. And Spanish players are very smart. So it is a different style of play. And but it is one of the favorite experiences in my career, and I actually would have continued my career there if it weren't for the
Mm.
COVID shutdown. Um,
And
yeah.
obviously, COVID impacted a lot of people around the world, but of course, careers were impacted in football terms as well. I want to speak about your return to America. After several years in Europe, you competed in the NPSL for Fort Worth. You've come back to the States after all those years, and you've brought back that European experience with you. What I mean, did you must have improved your game when you were away? So was there noticeable differences compared to a normal American player who spent their career there?
Yeah, there's a bit more to that part than people know about, and I actually have never really disclosed. Only the people close to me know. So I actually had another. I played in Andorra for two
Mm.
seasons in the Premier League. During one summer, I went to Europa League qualifiers with one of the clubs. However, I did not debut, but that was a very great experience. I had a third contract signed and everything. Um, to continue playing a third year in Andorra Premier League. And I thought I was going to, I was making a good living. I had a good life. I had an apartment in Portugal. I'd go back in, the Christmas time and have a month and a half off in Portugal every Christmas. I had a good life in Europe and I had a third contract signed, but the COVID shutdown came and Andorra was very, very strict. It was one of the strictest countries. They changed the visa rules and everyone had to have an Andorran green card to continue living and working there. And I was a Spanish resident at the time. That was the visa I had, and I couldn't qualify for the green card. I actually went back to Portugal and I intended to sign with the Portuguese team. And in preseason, I actually tore my ACL in 2021. So I tore my ACL 2021. We entered the second COVID, that was the second COVID shutdown. And I rehabbed in 8 months, 2022. Rehabbed in 8 months my ACL, came back in August for European preseason, and I was trying to trial everywhere. Unfortunately, everyone in Portugal, even though I had a good playing career before and everyone knew my resume throughout the country, they knew I tore my ACL. And that can be a bit of a black mark for a player. So I tried to play in Ireland that January, and I spent a preseason in Ireland searching any way I could possibly, get another work permit in Europe, get another European contract, and it didn't work out. And so I was too late for the U.S. window to sign, in the professional leagues, in the USL Championship or the USL One. And so I decided to come back home. As you know, my family is in Dallas, Texas, and I decided to play semi-professionally with the Fort Worth Vaqueros. And it was the first time coming back to U.S. soccer in years. So I could really see how the game changed in the U.S. and definitely came back with some European experience. And it was nice playing at home for the first time. My family could come watch me play and stuff. Um, and it was kind of a reset point to decide what I wanted to do next in my career because had just turned 30 at that point, or was just turning 30. I was 29, I was trying to decide, do I want to go back abroad or do I want to play in the United States at that point?
And you obviously made that return after this ACL injury. But when a player comes back after they've done that,
Yes.
how? I mean, when I've had injuries before, again, I've never played anywhere near professional level. But when you have injuries, it's in your mind subconsciously. Oh, I'm going to get injured again if I run too fast or stop like that. So an ACL is one of the most serious injuries you can get in football. So your brain must have changed. How do you see the game now? Are you always scared to do something?
Uh, honestly, I made a decision before the surgery that I was going to come back to football no matter what. And as I kind of told you a bit ago, I actually didn't tell people about it. I didn't talk about it. And I only started talking about it in the past couple of years to help younger players who I've seen go through, because it's a traumatizing injury, as you know. It changes a lot of players. A lot of players don't return to professional sport after that, or they don't return the same. Um, and so I really worked on the psychological aspect, and I actually came back really strong. I was lucky to have good people around me. I had a really good rehab process, and I really didn't come back with a lot of fear. As you'll know, I did have a second knee incident a couple years later, um, but I came back very, very strong from the ACL just because I really love the game that much. And I told myself, if I get to play one more 90 minutes at a decent level, that's worth it to me. That's worth the rehab process. And a lot of people would say that I came back the same player, or even to this day, that's another kind of hallmark of my career is just my longevity. And yeah, so I came back pretty well from the ACL and actually pretty quickly.
You did make a return to Portugal in 2022, September. What was that like to return, I suppose, to
Yep.
your second home?
Exactly. It is my second home, so it was easy. It was the same people, the same contacts. It was to get back into European football. Um, but I was still deciding, a bit torn in my head of what I want to do with the rest of the years of my career. Because as I said, I did turn 30 at that point, and my body was still feeling good. So I was trying to decide, because at that point you kind of decide, where do I maybe want to finish my career? You start having those thoughts. Um, do I want to have a European career, or do I still want to have more experiences? So I did sign a full season contract, which the European season goes August through May or whatever. But I returned to Portugal, which was like returning home. Ended up getting to December and thinking I did have some family situations going on at the time, and I went back to the United States for Christmas that year, and I was thinking, hey, I still want to do something new. And that's where Australia came about.
And Australia is, well, it was part of your journey from 2023. Again, their football league is pretty similar to the MLS in the terms that, there's no promotion or relegation in those flights. But why did you decide that Australia was a right move for you? How many offers did you have on the table before you went there?
Um, I mainly had European continuity, but I was kind of looking at second and third division offers, and I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Australia, I had a contract come through right before Christmas in the NPL, which is the second division of Australia football. And as you just said, there's no promotion or relegation. The second division of Australian football, it is regional. So there's an NPL in each, Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, NPLs. I didn't know much about Australian football. I just had, really good comments about, the lifestyle in Australia, New Zealand. And as I said, I had a family situation going on back home. And I thought, hey, I'm going to go for at least 4 months, 5 months. The visa was easy to get as an American for 1 year. I thought, I'm going to go for 5 months and enjoy my football. And that's how I came to Perth in the MPL. Um, and at the end of my first year, decided this has been really good for my life. And for the first time, made a decision football wise that wasn't based off of an agent, based off of finances, based off of supporting other family members, based off of anything else except for this is a lifestyle that I maybe want to pursue for myself. And yeah, I had A-League aspirations or potential Southeast Asia aspirations, which Australia is a good window for that. Um, and so that's how Australia came about. Originally, it was supposed to just be a little reprieve, a 4 month, 6 month reset. And as you know, I've been here for just over 3 years now.
So let's try and congest them together then. So you have spent a lot of time now in Australia, Olympic Kingsway being one of them,
Yeah.
and of course the Panthers as well. What was your experience like between the two? Do Australian clubs change? Because I know over there in Australia, soccer or football isn't the main sport.
It is not. Um, yeah, so I ended up going from Perth and then bouncing to Sydney to the Panthers, as you said, in Canberra. So I ended up kind of experiencing the football in every different cities of Australia, which Australia is a massive country. As you said, it's almost like the United States. Each region has a different, climate, kind of culture, kind of even footballing identity. But when I first arrived in Perth, which is a beautiful city, amazing beaches and everything, everyone said, Mark, you need to go to Sydney or Melbourne, just because better leagues, better clubs, bigger clubs, more financial ability and stuff. So I kind of started making my way east. 2024, which was when I was with the Panthers, that was my second year in Australia. I had my second knee setback at age, 30, 31, where I tore my meniscus pretty badly, where it required surgery. And so that kind of hampered that season. I came back from it strong, though, and ended up playing in Melbourne 2025, and I'm still in
Mm.
Melbourne this year. Um, to comment on the football in Australia, I was surprised. I know it's semi-professional. The financial capacity of some of the clubs, especially in Melbourne and Sydney, they, and this is the second division we're talking about, they definitely compete with the wages, professional wages in the United States of the USL Championship and USL One. And you kind of see that now. A lot of UK players have made their way over because they can actually use their, CVs to get a bit more than the part-time football they're making in the UK at step 6, step 5 in the UK. And then the same thing with some Canadian players who were actually playing in the CPL, the Canadian Premier League. They've made their way over to the MPL as well for the lifestyle of football. The finances can be a bit better. Um, I can talk about the play style
Sure.
as well in Australia. That was a bit of a surprise as well. The climate can be challenging in the summer, as you can. So that was a big adaptation. Very, very hot. The It's just challenging to play football in those conditions. That's the easiest way I can put it. You just have to think about the game differently and how you manage your energy when it gets that hot and difficult to play. The A League sometimes gets a bad rap. I think there's more quality in Australian football than people give credit for. Um, and you can see that with some of the foreigners that come here to play. Douglas Coaster was here last year. Great players. Juan Mata has been here for 2 seasons now. Douglas Costa, who I really respect as a player, came here. And I think you'd say like, oh, if the league is that poor, why don't they come here and bang in 15 goals a season? The conditions are challenging to play in here sometimes. And I do feel there is a European influence here. I was surprised by that as well. There's a huge immigrant population in a lot of these cities of Eastern Europeans as well. There's a lot of Greeks, a lot of Macedonians. There's a lot of Italians in Australia. So there is European football influence here in Australia, as well as a lot of UK influence as well. There's a lot of Irish, English. So the immigrant population has surprised me, and I think it enriches the football culture in Australia. There's a lot of African refugee populations here. From, I'm not going to say generations ago, but there's a lot of South Sudan players that are very athletic and crafty players. So it's been interesting and enjoyable in that
So
sense.
the current club you're at now is, well, Manhunningham United Blues, and I'm really interested to learn about what your future is as a player. I mean, you look good for your age. It seems that as long as the knee holds up, then you should be quite good. I'm presuming, well, maybe you want to retire in the States, or maybe you want to stay in Australia.
I'm not sure that's the question I'm facing right now. And my brother always rings me up and says, "Come back and play in the States," stuff like that. And it's tempting. Probably every 4 months, I think about, should I go back or not? Um, and then the other thing, the strange thing is that age question. I'm 33. I turned 34 this November, but I kind of got the knee sorted out, and the body holds up really well, and athletically I'm doing really well, and a lot of people still confuse me thinking I'm 23. It's quite funny actually, because I'll get scouted, get messages and stuff from agents, or clubs will reach out thinking I'm an under 23 player. So that's actually quite funny, seeing, do you want to come for this trial, we're interested in you, signing you, assuming that I'm 23 years old after they saw my clips or scouted me somewhere. So that's quite funny, because most players my age, they're looking at coasting. But athletically, I'm still holding strong, and I think I'll definitely have 5+ years. And I know that sounds otherworldly, but also I think our mentality needs to change about that. That the players can play longer, and we are seeing that. Some of the players in the World Cup right now are quite old, and they still have a lot of quality, athletically and technically. So I am considering Southeast Asia. There's some interesting opportunities and leagues there. That would mark off my fifth continent that I played on, professionally and semi-professionally. And then also it's a lifestyle question where I maybe want to make a life. And so that's where I'm really torn at the
So
moment.
my last question to you then, Mark, is a lot of footballers, well, a lot of people get the interpretation that these footballers are multimillionaires. And the reality is the majority of footballers, earn really good money, but they earn good money for their career. So once you finish your footballing career, unless you're a hidden multimillionaire, what do you want to be doing once your career finishes?
That has been the $1 million question as well, for the past couple of years. To answer a couple aspects of that question, the situation with me is no, I surprisingly have never signed a $1 million contract, as you can probably sort out. However, I have had, as you can see, longevity in my career. And surprisingly, some players, you say, oh, they played professionally, but they played professionally for what, 1 to 4 years. I'd have to go back and count, but I've signed over maybe 10 professional contracts. So it's been a longevity question for me. And I was very lucky to have my mom kind of on my ass, from when I was a kid, do the right things with the money, put it here, put it there. I got really into financial investing and stuff like that. And yeah, I was always pretty shrewd with my money. Another thing is I always took the team living situation until I was probably about 26 or 27. And it wasn't until I was 26 or 27 did I actually finally say, I don't need the team living situation. I don't need 1 to 6 roommates or, things like that. And I'm going to start living on my own. Um, Having said that, as you can figure out, have made a living off of football since I was that first contract in Europe. Um, I won't be able to give up the sport by any means. I will stay involved in the sport, whether that's through coaching or as an agent. From my career, the agent opportunity has already arisen. Players reaching out to me saying, "Can I come play in Australia? Can I come play in Europe?" Obviously, American players, can you link me to Europe? Can you link me to agents? So that's very easy for me to professionalize, to step into an agent intermediary role. So that will always be there. I'm not sure if I'll go into coaching, like professional coaching, but I love the sport, so somehow my life will be involved in football. But I do have some investment management projects that are based in the United States, that have kind of taken off in the past year and a half. Um, I'll just have to find something that scratches that itch, that adrenaline rush that football's given me, playing week in and week out. So that's something I'm searching for in my heart as well. Yeah,
But Mark, no, look, I wish you all the best in whatever you end up doing post football. I'm sure, as you mentioned, the 4, 5, 6 years of your career are still yet to come. But thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
I appreciate it, Jamie. It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.